Hello, you are now entering the infinite void. Hang on tight. We cannot save you now.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. I'm your co-host Jacob.
And I'm your co-host Matty, and this week's topic is space tourism. So yeah, probably a bit of a departure from some of our previous episodes that have been quite deep and a bit theoretical at times. So
Yeah, definitely.
probably this week's going to be more of a discussion, a bit more sort of pop sciencey sort of stuff. But yeah, space tourism. So I'm guessing most people listening to this podcast are already familiar with, Virgin Galactic and sort of that sort of thing. But sort of what are your opening remarks on space tourism? Why do you see it going? What's your sort of interest in it? What is
So,
most interesting to you?
so originally I thought it was like me being my little sci-fi being. I thought it was like hotels in space and stuff on other planets, and I didn't actually realize that, like, essentially it's just any kind of activity in space for recreational use. So it could just mean like flying up there and stuff. So I was quite surprised when I was doing my research this week because for me, it's more so like, yeah, I want to go and stay in space for like a couple of weeks, not just take a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
trip.
yeah. So yeah, I guess there's this sort of like range of what space tourism is. So like at one extreme end is these sort of hotels in space. People can
Yeah,
go stay on the moon for days or weeks at a time, sort of thing.
yeah,
And I guess at the other end is stuff that is now quite developed. So I guess the sort of suborbital things. So, the sort of vomit comet kind of thing where you go up and do a few minutes, sort of tens of minutes of like zero gravity stuff. And then
yeah,
these sorts of things that Virgin Galactic are pushing, which are they're more like space planes rather than rockets that we would think about. So,
yeah.
um,
I really want to
yeah,
go in one of those suborbital planes.
I'd absolutely love to do it. Like, it'd be
Yeah,
so good.
I'd really like to experience that. That is like on my to-do list before I die for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully, if anything sort of comes out of these endeavours, it'll mean that space is more accessible and
Mm,
cheaper. I can, like, I guess we'll probably get more into like the economics of it a bit later on, but I can sort of see it going away, not quite the extent of, but similar to like aviation, like
yeah,
sort of early 1900s, okay, 1950s, like the beginning of the jet age. It was like the rich and famous, like going on planes.
yeah,
And then sort of within about 30, 40 years, you sort of got like the beginning of like low cost carriers where you can like fly to Europe for a couple of quid sort of thing. So
yeah.
I don't think it will probably go as extreme as that, but I would expect sort of by 2050 that, it's sort of like a novelty sort of, you can get a flight to space for like maybe a few hundred or a few £1,000 kind of thing. So
Oh, it'd just be awesome. I hope that I'm either not too old or I don't have any health problems that don't let me do it. Like, oh, like your blood pressure's too high, you can't fly. I'll be gutted if something like that happens when it's actually
yeah,
available.
yeah. I mean, it is definitely sort of on my bucket list as something to do.
Yeah,
Even if it is just like the vomit comet, like a few minutes zero gravity kind of thing. So
totally.
it'd be just awesome, I think.
It would be.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when I was like beginning to look into it, I was quite surprised because, as you said, it covers like a lot of different things. You've got like suborbital space fly, orbital space fly, and then obviously the last one, which is a little bit more
Mhm.
sci-fi based and a bit more down the timeline. You've got journeys to other planets.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I was looking at this, the one thing that surprised me is that sort of how long it's been around. Because I guess, like for me at least, when I think of like space tourism, it is like the Virgin Galactic's
Yeah,
Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos's company, and sort of I know SpaceX is sort of looking to get into this or looking to be a part of this. But actually, it's been around for quite a while, and I this is literally straight off the Wikipedia page. But like the first like tourism was done by the Russians using Soyuz spacecraft back in 2001, the first flight, and I think they only did a couple of flights. I think maybe about 7 or 8 people. But essentially, this was like sort of like the public paying sort of millions of pounds just to go on these like Soyuz spacecraft as like a passenger, and then I think these like spacecrafts are going to like the International Space Station. So it's kind of weird that it's been done and has been done for a while. These, as I said, it was only a few people. I think they stopped like in like 2009 or something, so it's not been done for a long time. But also, it was a country's space program that was doing it, rather than these like commercial companies that we probably more associate with it now. So that was quite interesting to me, at least.
That's cool. Yeah, the only thing that there's a few companies that I've heard, but one of the main ones that I've heard that are like recent that are talking about doing it is actually SpaceX, because I think I've read somewhere or I watched an announcement. Aren't they doing like a lunar mission with two like not celebrities, but it's like an artist is one of them that's paid to go on it, and I think they're going to the moon on the Starship when it's finished.
Yeah, I've heard. They actually.
It's like a billionaire or something, I think, isn't it? Like an billionaire artist from.
Yeah.
Is it China?
I don't know who the people are, but this is it a lunar orbit? They're not actually landing, are they? I don't think.
No, yeah, they're gonna go and do like one orbit of the moon and then come back, kind of thing.
Yeah. So
Which is still cool.
Yeah. So obviously SpaceX, as always, are going to be like a massive player in this, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because they've just got the technology to do it, so, and Elon Musk could just throw money at it.
Totally.
It is going to be sort of like the billionaires and like celebrities, and that are going to be probably the first people to go, and hopefully it will sort of trickle down in the same way that aviation did. But
you'd hope so. I think my kind of dream on it would be just to like go and stay in a hotel that's up in orbit, kind of like the International Space Station, and just get to like see the Earth. I want that like observer effect that everybody always talks about.
Yeah, I think for me, I know you've been looking at Space Hotel, so you're like dying to get onto it. But I think for me, the sort of suborbital flight stuff isn't really space. It's really cool, and I'd love to do it, but that to me isn't like space tourism.
Yeah, especially with how like big space is, it's kind of funny how we like what we class it as space tourism.
Yeah, I think for me, space tourism will be like ticked off once we get to the point where you can go and do like an orbit of the Earth, and then we sort of build it from there with like missions to the moon, or space hotels and longer sort of durations in space.
Yeah, for sure. It'd be funny one day if like humans from the future look back on us and they're like, how primitive space tourism is as soon as you leave that celestial body's gravity well. Like, as long as you're like still within like Earth's gravity, that doesn't count.
Yeah, I mean, but yes, for me, and I think we will probably see it relatively soon, if a member of the public who is paying can do an orbit of the Earth, that is like step one of actual space tourism.
Yeah, totally. And I think as well, like you're saying, it's definitely going to happen, because we've even got it happening with films now, haven't we? We've got Tom Cruise going up to the International Space Station. Yes,
this is. I sort of read it in the news a few weeks back, and I didn't really sort of read any more into it. But yeah, they're basically filming a Hollywood blockbuster movie on the International Space Station, or at least part of it on the International Space Station.
Yeah,
that's just crazy, isn't it? Like...
It is, and it's just classic Tom Cruise, because like he's one of those people that just does psycho stunts. Do you know what I mean? Like I remember when I was a bit younger and I watched him like attach himself to the side of that like bomber that took off, but he's hanging on the outside of it, and it's like, of course. And then he went and did all the like stuff. Is it Top Gun 2?
Yeah,
I've seen some of the trailers for that, and that looks insane. How he's like banking and doing all of the flips and stuff, and it's like now he's like, "Yep, I want to go to space."
Yeah, but
taking method acting to a new level.
If you just saw the headline, like actor to film in space, you would probably think it's Tom Cruise, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Out of anybody, I would have thought it probably would have been him first, kind of thing.
Yeah. And actually, this is sort of one sort of topic I wanted to talk about was last week in the news section we discussed this, like using space for advertising and things.
Mm.
So space tourism, I think, has probably got a big part of it is like how that money is spent and whether it's a good use of time and money.
Yeah.
Because we said like, well, we'd love to go and like filming in space is cool and stuff, but when you have like a limited amount of launches and a limited budget, is it really the right thing to do to be sending millionaires to just sort of have a nice time, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
I think. What's your sort of take on that?
It's yeah, no, I kind of agree with you because I mean, like, it's almost it's a little bit selfish, isn't it? Because like I can sit here and be like, yeah, that's all I want to do, and if I got the opportunity, like, I'd do it. But it is kind of selfish, and if you are thinking of like future humans, unless it's like fully renewable, or we've got something out of like a sci-fi film, like some space elevator or something, and it's not actually like polluting or cluttering up the earth as you leave it to come back in kind of thing, then I'd probably like lean more towards it. But
yeah, I think the sort of money is the big one, isn't it? There's a potential here that like there are people who will pay tens of millions of pounds, and like I guess if a company like SpaceX is doing these launches and making tens of millions of pounds a time, then that's money that will be, in the case of SpaceX, will be going sort of back into development and stuff.
well, yeah, totally. If it like moves the timelines up for like the moon missions and the Mars missions, and as we slowly like spread out to like the moons of like Jupiter and Saturn and stuff, I'm all for it. If that moves like the goalposts 50 years forward because we've got more funding to do it, then I think in that kind of sense, then it's good. But if it's literally just like recreational and that money's not going to like go back into the development or anything like that, then
I think it's I think there sort of is sort of a crossroads here. Like we sort of have to make a decision about whether this is like short-term stuff that enables future missions and like develops and advances technology. And I said before about like aviation, that's sort of what happened with planes. Like millionaires were flying around just like on fancy holidays and stuff, and that sort of paved the way for air travel to become accessible to the masses. Whether it's that, or I think there's sort of potential that it just becomes sort of like a rich guy's sort of playground kind of thing, and it sort of just stays in this place where, the rich and famous are able to go for like tens of thousands of pounds or hundreds of thousands of pounds, but there's no real point to it. So I think that's just sort of something to be mindful of, and I don't think really gets discussed a lot because.
I'd agree with you. My kind of mindset on it, like if we were gonna do it now with like current technologies and not try and add extra launches and do stuff like that, my kind of like idea would be that you'd kind of just kind of treat these passengers almost like cargo, kind of like how Elon Musk like talks about it with SpaceX. Like when he rents room out to like other companies to put cargo on his rockets, kind of just have a space for like people if they want to go, kind of thing.
That's what those like early Russian missions were like. I think it was literally people paying to just get on the spare seat on like ISS like restock mission. Like I think that's basically what it was. So
well, as well, if it went like super futuristic and we've got planes one day that take off from the ground and they can like fly out of like Earth's atmosphere and come back in whenever they want to, then it probably would be less of an issue.
Yeah.
But with like current space technologies, because even though like SpaceX rockets are like reusable and they come back down and stuff, there are still like parts and other stuff that we do that, as we discussed in our space debris episode.
I think there's probably sort of a scale of things that we could be doing, and it's like whether we use like current technologies, like current rocket technologies, just to blast rich people into space, or whether we like develop more reusable technology like space planes and stuff that have the capability to actually achieve orbit and stuff. So I think it's quite an interesting debate, and I think probably over the next couple of years it's going to become quite prevalent about like what are we using this for and why are we doing it, sort of thing. So because it does have the potential to do a lot of good and like advance the technology a lot, but it
Yeah,
also has the
totally.
potential just to sort of become something that would just, it's just another thing to spend money on, kind of thing. So
Yeah. Imagine as well, like if there were like laboratories for hire and stuff up in orbit, and like as a
yeah,
scientist, you could just like go up there and do all your work
yeah,
and everything. It'd be awesome. Or even like health nutrition people as well, like being able to go up and do like studies and stuff, and
yeah.
botanists and
I
everything. It'd be insane.
Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, I didn't really think about that when I was doing this, but there probably is like a massive market for, in the same way that like in physics we have like special labs at like the South Pole and
Yeah.
on the tops of mountains in like Chile and stuff. These sorts of places they're not accessible to the public, but like strictly speaking, anyone who has like a reason to go there could apply to go there, and you could see like a private company building a lab in space and having like some sort of accommodation attached to it, and you see people just sort of going up there. They apply to do their research project. Oh, we want to
Yeah.
hire the lab for a couple of weeks and go stay up there, sort of thing. So yeah,
Totally.
that's an interesting thing I hadn't really thought about.
Yeah, totally. And like it could just be insane. Do you know what I mean? Like you could have, or even like that. There's an idea for someone who wants to start a company that's got billions of dollars. Just like almost in a way, kind of like figure out how to have storage units in space that you can rent out to hire to people, and they can just go up there and like carry out their research.
Yeah, I think that this for me is why Virgin Galactic's a really interesting one, because they are sort of taking a space plane approach, and there's a potential to build on that. Is that the biggest probably cost is launch costs at the moment.
Yeah.
So like SpaceX have obviously driven it down massively, and I don't know the exact figures, but we're talking sort of tens of percents, probably even more than that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like reduction in cost kind of thing. But if we could get to the point where you could sort of get someone into orbit for a similar sort of price that it would cost to send someone to the South Pole, for example, which is not cheap.
Yeah.
Get to that sort of level, then you're talking about really opening a space up to at least sort of specialist applications, sort of thing.
How much does it cost to get to the South Pole? Because I think the Virgin Galactic like ticket. Well, when I say ticket, it's like what they're saying it's going to cost. I think it's going to be 200,000, isn't it, to like secure your seat for that?
In my head, I'm thinking, again, I don't have exact figures, but I think the South Pole, it sort of depends whether you go on like the ship as part of like an expedition or you sort of fly in. But, you're talking like a couple of flights to weird places. And then, you have the cost of the actual, like, in the case of like an expedition ship, the cost of the ship itself kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
It's a lot,
how
really,
much-
if you think about it.
yeah, well, probably. I think the that David Attenborough new research vessel, did it cost something like 150 million or something?
I think so. It was big.
You're talking millions of pounds.
Yeah.
So, if we could get to the point where, did you say 200,000 for?
Yeah, for a Virgin Galactic flight. I think that's how much it's cost to like secure your place on the list. So I don't know if you have to pay more in the future, but even that, it's like you said, you're only kind of going, you're not actually like going into space, are you? You're like seeing the curb and everything.
Yeah. In my mind, if I was going to put like a very rough figure on it, I think if you could get to the point where someone could get to the International Space Station or a similar thing to sort of get there for £50,000,
Yeah.
then that's the sort of point where a university could say, "Oh, we're going to raise money, and we're going to send someone to go and do some research there
Totally.
for a while." So, there is, I think there's sort of a lot of potential, and I think probably launch costs is one of the things that at least sort of space tourism is pitched at as trying to reduce. Just if we're doing more launches, we're doing this more regularly. You can start introducing mass manufacturing, then the costs come down considerably. So
it's like that meme where it shows like the different brains of like mind explosions, and it's like instead of using you're like Tesla stock to buy a Tesla. You're using your Tesla stock to buy a seat on a SpaceX ship one day.
Yeah.
Wait till your retirement and just cash it all out and go on a trip on Elon's rocket.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess space hotels. This is. I know you sort of mentioned to me earlier about it. You were looking at that and sort of thing.
Yeah. So there's two that
Hmm.
one I had no idea about, which I'll start with, and then the other one, which is pretty awesome. But this one is called Orion Span. I don't know if you've heard of this. And essentially, it's a company from America, and they're planning on building a private commercial space station called the Aurora Space Station. And it's going to be in a low Earth orbit, and it's going to function as a space hotel for up to 6 tourists at a time, accompanied with astronauts.
Okay.
So poor astronauts that've got to go up there with these reckless human beings that just have money.
Imagine training to become an astronaut for like 10 years and then you basically become like a butler.
Yeah. I wonder if the money's good though.
I imagine it probably would be.
Yeah. It says here they're still in provisional stages, but the company has already sold out several months worth of reservations, and the reservations have already cost over 7 million, which is pretty cool. And they're planning on having the first guests up in 2023, which is pretty close.
That's not a lot of time to launch.
No, I don't think that's going to happen.
The space station and get it assembled in space.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. And then, so yeah, that sounds interesting. That's literally all they've got on that at the moment. And when you go to their website, it's kind of like a sign up kind of thing for news. But that's an interesting one. And then the only other one that I knew lots about was this Von Braun space hotel that they've been talking about building for a long time.
I have heard of this, at least.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's going to be built in the 20s. I think it's planned to be built and orbiting as early as 2025. But I'm not entirely sure. But it's by a private company called the Gateway Foundation, and they basically want to build like a spaceport, not a sport, a spaceport, and it's got it's in the shape of a Van Braun rotating kind of one. You know, the ones that he always used to like do for his like Disney documentaries and stuff.
So this is the one with like a big ring,
like the artificial gravity, isn't it, or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I've known about that one for a while because that one's been in the news quite a lot and they've been talking about it. But yeah, it's going to act as a spaceport for people going to the moon and Mars, and it's also going to act as a hotel for people that just want to go and stay in orbit for a couple of days.
Yeah.
But
I mean, yeah, you said about it in the first one, there is this sort of issue of like safety, isn't there, ultimately? If you have people staying on the space station, it's not a place where, you sort of go on you go on holiday to the other side of the world. If something goes wrong, you ultimately are in civilization.
Yeah.
If something goes wrong on a space station, then only probably a few people in the world are sort of qualified to actually deal with it. So
I wonder as well, like, what the process will be for this when it becomes a more like normal thing, because ideally you wouldn't want somebody either going on it that maybe didn't have a background check or something. Do you know what I mean? And then you get up there and they're like deciding that they're going to kick off.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
because there's not a lot you can do when you're in that situation.
Like when you board the plane, there's obviously like some checks going on. You have to have a passport and stuff.
Yeah.
And like fundamentally, there's like security checks at the airport, and the actual like cockpit is sealed off, so you can't get to it. How would that sort of work in a space station? And it sort of gets a bit weird, doesn't it? Like,
yeah,
who is going and
as well
how you control it.
Like you were saying in the space debris one, like they have to move that space station.
Yeah.
And if there's only like one astronaut on this private one, or like two, what happens if something like serious happens? Are you just gonna ask one of the tourist like people to help you? Just gonna be like, listen, you need to come and help me move this right now, otherwise we're all dead.
Yeah. Like, I guess, well, almost certainly they would have to have some sort of like escape vehicle that they could use, and it's like, how does that work when, you know, what would an in-flight safety video look like for a space station? Like, because there's so many things that could go wrong, and like you're trying to explain to someone who is perhaps just, you know, a celeb that knows nothing about it, and you're trying to explain, oh, in the event of like depressurization, we have to do this. In the event of sort of a micrometeor strike, we have to do this. In the event of a power surge, we do this. And there's, you know, a fire and all of these sorts of things.
Yeah.
You know, it's never been done where a considerable amount of the people on the space station are not trained to operate the space station.
Yeah.
You know, so I know like there's been a few, you know, there was these space tours with like Russia and NASA have put, you know, sort of scientists into space sort of thing, who are just there to do the science. You know, they will have like a basic level of training.
Yeah.
But then if you're talking about having, you know, one astronaut to 3 tourists or 4 tourists or 10 tourists, then it becomes like a very difficult thing to manage, just in terms of like getting people to do stuff, because, you know, even the most sort of level-headed person, I think, if you're on a space station and suddenly a fire breaks out, unless you are like the pinnacle of your training, like as an astronaut, you are not going to be able to deal with that.
Yeah. Maybe it like requires better breakthroughs with AI. Maybe it needs to be like managed more so from the ground, so it's kind of just like an experience for you, like you get in the ship and it takes you there kind of thing. It's less like there's more autopilot in the situation, maybe. But then as well, how wouldn't want to be that guy training that, because like imagine having to like code the ethics into that, with like if there's a disaster happening and you need to fire the escape pod or something, how many humans need to be in the escape pod for it to decide it's good enough to fire if all of them aren't in the escape pod?
Yeah, there's so many. Because
like, can you imagine that? Like, if something's gone wrong, so everyone's like, right, we need to get in, but then it won't launch because there's only 3 of you, and there needs to be like 5, or then it does launch and it leaves like 2, and then that company gets sued.
Yeah, and like even the most basic tasks that, you know, even if we assumed, oh, everything's automated, and, you know, maybe you have like a couple of astronauts just there in case, but like the tourists are just there for an experience. Even the most basic thing of, you know, eating and drinking and sleeping and go to the toilet is something that will require training.
Yeah.
And like a considerable amount of training.
Imagine that they have like special chefs for space.
Well, space food is like maybe something we should like
that would
try
be
and
a good
incorporate
episode.
into it. Because I know a little bit about it, and some of the stuff they do is just really, really cool. They have like these like special things where you have like your food in like a like pouch container thing, and you like plug it into the wall and it like shoots it with like hot air, I think. And it's like, because you can't obviously use like ovens and stuff in that way.
That's cool.
Yeah.
When I like a couple of years ago now, this is like when I was at uni, when I went out to Florida with my girlfriend, we went to like the Kennedy Space Center and got to like walk around and have a look at everything. And I tried some of their like freeze dried like packet food in their like little restaurant thing. It was called like Spudnik potatoes or something. And it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. But I could totally live off that if it got me into space. No complaints.
One of my friends from uni bought, I can't remember where he went, but he went somewhere and he bought back, it was like a tube of Russian space borscht. It was like a horrible meat stew paste, and it was awful. It was terrible. But like even just stupid things like this, you know, if you're paying £20,000 to go to
Yeah.
space, or £20 million to go to space, I imagine most people would expect a certain level of in-flight meals.
Well, have you seen those Starship renders of like the on-flight entertainment and stuff? It looks absolutely insane. There's
I've
like
not seen these.
So there's like if anybody's listening right now, you should go on Google and type this. I think it's just like Starship renders, but
Have a look at this. You keep talking, I'm gonna get them up.
effect like it's a woman floating in the air with like a violin, and she's got like ribbons all wrapped around her, and the crowd sitting there, and the backdrop behind her is like a window to Earth, and it looks insane.
Starship Entertainment. No, that's a management group. Never mind.
But it looks awesome. It's like this woman playing. It might not be a woman. It could be a robot. I don't know how far along they're planning this one, but it just looks awesome. And it's like this woman playing violin, 0G, whilst everybody else is kind of strapped in like a theatre, and they're just watching her on this backdrop of Earth. And they were like renders for the ship, and I was like, that's so cool. There's like so many ways that you could just imagine this going, can't you? Like, yeah.
And if we're talking like 100 years, 1,000 years in the future, then yeah, this sort of crazy stuff is sort of fun to think about, I guess. But the reality is that for the foreseeable future, it's going to be a few people perilously strapped into a small seat somewhere.
Yeah, eating dog food.
Yeah, pretty much.
I like how we said this episode was going to be really fun, and we've got like quite like sad about it already.
We've gone from space hotels to strapped to a tiny chair eating dog food.
Yeah. I was. Oh God.
Okay, go on. No, go on. No.
I was just looking, so I just wanted to check. So there's actually a couple of companies that have failed when they basically attempted to do space tourism. I've got two here. So there's Galactic Suit Space Resort, and that was founded in 2007, and the concept was devised by a Barcelona-based space tourism company.
Mm-hmm.
And they took aspects of this Aurora space station that's being built by the Orion span, but wanted it to be purely for space tourists. So it can't be like privately hired or like corporate or anything like that. It's just people paying to go on holiday. And they had a goal of launching it back in 2012, but were met with widespread skepticism. And ultimately, the company failed to get a rocket system capable of getting people up into orbit. So that one failed. And then there's another one called the Golden Spike Company, who wanted to have a hotel on the surface of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And they announced it at a press conference in 2012. And it was some former NASA employees and some other private like engineers and stuff. But it hasn't gone anywhere since, and the project got took offline 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think, especially with that first one, like being in 2012, I feel like now is the first time where any of this sort of becomes feasible because we've got launch systems to do it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're talking about 2012 trying to get like a space station or a space hotel built, you've somehow got to either create your own rocket or get a ride with like Russian Soyuz or like the end of the space shuttle mission, like which is not a very feasible solution, to be honest. There are sort of like fundamental technologies that we are beginning to get. So like the launch systems, the actual space station components themselves. So how is that going to be assembled in space and things? And this is why I feel like through like these developments of the early stuff, which is going to be sort of like privately funded by millionaires, it's sort of important that we sort of push those technologies and don't just treat them as sort of like joy rides entirely. Obviously the very first ones are going to be just like flights, but then we should really try and push some of these other technologies of like space construction and stuff. So
yeah. I was just quickly checking because I remembered this popping up not that long ago. But there's a startup that wants to build that space balloon, isn't there? Have you seen this?
I've not seen this.
So there's a startup that wants to build it. I say space balloon. Let me find the name of the company so people can search this. Oh yeah, okay. So the company's called The Edge of Space.
Okay, that rings a bell now. You said it, yeah.
And the ticket costs 75,000, and it kind of looks like a hot air balloon, but instead of you sitting in like the little basket, there's like windows and stuff in the balloon. So I'm guessing it's like made out of metal or something. I don't really know. It looks really, really weird, and it's built to take people up into space so they can see the curvature of the Earth and give them that observer effect, and then bring them back down. And it cruises 3 times the altitude of a commercial airline.
So about 100,000 feet then.
Yeah, it's literally what it says, actually. Well done, mate.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, again, this is a sort of suborbital like stuff that is sort of like a stepping stone, I guess, just to get people used to the idea of going near space. But what space is not particularly well defined. I think people say 100 kilometers, which is the Kármán line.
Yeah, that's actually what this was saying. This is going to sit just below it.
Okay, yeah. So like 100 kilometers is like the edge of space, but even that's not near like low Earth orbit. So I think the International Space Station orbits at 225 kilometers, something like that. So,
I remember having my mind blown last year when I realized how far the moon actually was to Earth in like distance.
Yeah.
Like when you see that like diagram of it, like with how far it actually is away, and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, because we always like see like the moon and like the solar system as like in a book, and it's these things that sort of like ping pong ball size, separated by a few inches, and you think, oh wow, but like the scales are pretty mental. Like...
Was it Brian Cox that like went out to like a salt lake with marbles and did like the correct distance in reference to how big a marble would be?
I've seen it done a few times with like different things.
Yeah. It always blows my mind.
Yeah, actually, you carry on talking about something. There's a really interesting one that I want to bring up about that.
No worries.
So I know there's one which is there's like a city somewhere that's at the center of the city has like a I think it's an observatory or some sort of education center, which is like a big like sphere, like a big building, a sphere, and that like represents the scale of the sun. And then like there's like things throughout the city and way beyond the city that like are then the planets like scaled as well. So like in the middle of the city you have this like education center, and then like in a park somewhere like kilometers away you have like a tiny little like Mercury, and then it goes for like kilometers. And I don't think I'll find it, but I'll try to pull it up on the Twitter afterwards if I can find the name of it.
Yeah, do it. We'll stick it up. We'll stick it up for sure. But where I kind of got to with the end of like my space tourism was like short term. It seems it's going to be mostly like Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin with SpaceX, and then long term, we're looking at off Earth stuff, which for me, I probably won't live to be around to see it, but my grandchildren might, maybe.
Yeah. I think if I was going to put sort of time bounds on it, I'd say in the next 10 years we start to see the first people do actual like space stuff. So not just like suborbital flights, but the first member of the public paying and doing a sort of orbit of the Earth. And then probably within 25 years you could probably see someone going to the moon and doing sort of a long, maybe a few days sort of thing. 50 years, perhaps a sort of proper space station hotel-y stuff. And then the sort of like moon base and things, I think you're probably talking like 100 years plus out, to be honest.
I can't. Did we discuss it in a previous episode when we were saying like imagining like a dystopian future, instead of like doing community service, you have to go to Mars for a couple of years? Did we talk about that?
I don't know. I can't remember.
This might have just been one of my random dreams, so I apologize if it was, but I don't know who I was talking to, or maybe it was a dream that I had, but it was this idea that I was thinking about, that like maybe one day when we're trying to get like the settlement set up on Mars, that like everybody would have community service where for like a certain age you get shipped off to Mars to help build it, and then you get to come back and just live with your like universal basic income on Earth, and the robots will be running everything, but you have to go to Mars for a couple of years to help like build it. And I was thinking then like that would be great for this. Everybody then gets to experience space, but you have to go for like a purpose and go and work there for a little bit when you're up there to come back down.
That would be the sign we've made it, when sort of space travel becomes a bit of a chore, and like we're complaining, oh, I've got to go fly to Australia in 2 hours. Great, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's so long.
Do you think one day we'd have like travel like that, where like you'd get into like a ship, and then it would like fly up, and then you'd kind of just let the Earth rotate, and then it would come back down on that country?
I don't think quite like that. I think like the weird thing I think people forget is to get into space, like an orbit. It's not just about going up.
Yeah.
Like most of it is your like velocity along the Earth.
Yeah.
Because you're basically like you're basically just falling over the horizon sort of thing when you orbit. So like, I think we could get to the point where we have like space planes that do go up into actual space or the edge of space, and do basically like almost a quarter of an orbit and come down somewhere.
Yeah.
Like that would be my sort of. I think that is probably what would happen. Whether that will happen, I don't know. But you know, the thing is that all of this like space travel stuff is obviously as a larger background of like, we say, oh, people will be able to go to Australia in 2 hours for a meeting, but like there's this sort of other background of obviously what's happening now, and as we advance more, is do people even need to go to Australia for a meeting or something like that? Like,
yeah, especially with like the internet and stuff. But
yeah,
no, totally. And this is something that's just like gone off in my head too. There's the whole flip side of space tourism, like the whole like workforce. Because like I think, and I'm not going crazy, I swear Space Force you can apply now to be like a janitor for Space Force missions, and it's like the idea that you'll be working in space but as a cleaner or as a chef. And that's pretty cool. Yeah,
but again, it's just the amount of training that is required to do this sort of stuff. And,
yeah, true.
You know, if you ultimately have a ship that can have 10 people on it, do you want 10 astronauts who can just do bits here and there and get by, or do you want 3 astronauts and a chef and a cleaner and like all these sort of things? So, you know, there's sort of a lot of, it's not issues, because obviously these are things that we have to address and haven't really before of, but like, I guess things that someone needs to consider when we're doing all this sort of stuff. And I think that's sort of, like I said at the start, that step between sort of space flights where you go up and do, 10 or 30 minutes of like zero gravity, that is still a long, long way from people being in space, like in orbit. Like,
well, like even like look at where we are now compared to like films. Like you're talking hundreds of years until we get to a point where we've got like cruise ships going into space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just such a massive challenge, Even with a space plane, like Virgin Galactic, it's a massive achievement when it does get done, and like it's a huge thing. But ultimately, if something went not catastrophically wrong, but if something went wrong, that plane would just glide down back to Earth and could land at presumably they're going to have like a few like airports that it can land at.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. If something goes wrong in orbit, that's pretty much end game. Like it's not. There's no real recovery plan from that, except unless you get lucky and you can get people into an escape.
And it's only going to get, like, the probability of something hitting you is only going to get worse, like we discussed with space debris. It's only going to get, like, more clogged up there. And, like, that's a scary thought, that it's going to get more, like, polluted with debris. And you're going to have more people up there not really knowing what they're doing either.
And it's also, like, the fact that the craft itself is dangerous. Like, if you're on a plane or a space plane, I've not seen the interiors of Virgin Galactic, but if like Virgin Galactic was a similar sort of thing to the like Vomit Comet things, or even like an airliner, there's not a lot that someone can do to mess something up. Like you could imagine someone on one of those things having like a complete like breakdown and like really like losing it. Not a lot can go wrong.
Yeah.
If someone like lost it on the space station, like really started like thrashing around and like going sort of like off on one, like that is a really, really bad thing to happen.
Yeah.
And then, to mitigate against that, okay, we're going to get the space station and we're going to deck it out with, plastic sort of insulators and sort of cover everything up. You've then got the extra cost of launching all that stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot, really, isn't it? It's a lot just for us to get up there and have a bit of fun and take some photos.
So, yeah, I think it's... I think in the next 10 years we'll start to see people doing space tourism and sort of really starting to begin on this. I don't think we're going to see space hotels just yet, but...
Do you think... Because I was thinking about this a couple of days ago. So we've got, like... If Tom Cruise is going to be, like, the first... celebrity. I was thinking about this. Do you reckon we're gonna, in the next 10 years, we'll get like an influencer,
like a YouTuber or something?
Yeah, like I don't know who. Like in fact, I wouldn't put it past Mr. Beast, if I'm honest.
I was gonna say Mr. Beast.
Yeah.
I can see the thumbnail now.
Yeah.
I spent how many million going to space?
Yeah. Yeah. Last one to leave the space station or something. I don't know. Yeah, no, it'll definitely be him for sure. I was just about to ask that out then, but it's kind of obvious. If anybody's listening and you can think of anybody else, put them down in the comments below. But it's probably going to be Mr. Beast.
Probably Mark Roper will probably build one, isn't it? Like...
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking Marcus as well, maybe. But
yeah, I wouldn't put it past, again, somebody like YouTube has the money to do it, and it would be a pretty crazy thing, But this goes back to the sort of advertising thing, We're seeing now sort of adverts where products go. Wow, the original ones were sort of the astronauts would just film like a video in space, and now we're starting to see like products go up. It probably isn't far away until we see people going up to do an advert or a film sort of thing. So.
I'm just saying right now, we would both be totally okay with doing a podcast episode in space. If there's anybody listening right now, that
if you want to sponsor the podcast, and get us a ride into space, that would be much appreciated.
We'll do it. You can film the reactions as well. We won't turn any of it off. If we're crying like babies being launched up into orbit, that can all be part of it too.
Yeah, that's fine by me.
But should we move on to some news for the week? Because some cool stuff's happened.
Okay. Do you want to... Actually, no, I'll start this week because I know last week in our sort of otherworldly explorations, we talked about sort of water on other planets and using that as potentially... a sort of resource when we do go to Mars and stuff.
Yeah. So
this was something that I saw this week was a plan from the Japanese space agency, JAXA. They've actually got this plan and it seems quite... I think it's still sort of a prototype plan, so they're still in the stage of getting funding, but it seems to be costed and sort of planned out as a sort of draft, that they're going to launch or sort of build a lunar space station at the poles, and they're going to use the polar water to sort of power hydrogen cells and power spacecraft from that. So, the funding amount that they're applying for or are in the process of getting is $2.7 billion yearly for 15 years. But it's sort of linked with NASA. So NASA have this plan to build. So in collaboration with NASA, they're building a sort of gateway space station which will orbit the moon. And I think we might have mentioned that on a previous podcast, but there will be this gateway space station that orbits the moon, and then they're going to have this sort of base on the poles, which they're able to launch to and from using the water as a sort of energy resource for hydrogen cells. So
that's cool.
Yeah. The sort of things that they're planning for, it says space station built in the 2020s, whether that will happen or not. And then sort of using this fuel factory by around 2035. So this is the sort of, again, one of those sort of technologies and steps that is probably going to happen for us to be sort of like a multi-planetary species. This sort of idea of using resources on other planets, because they said, I can get the right amount, for a trip to and from the gateway, so a sort of return trip from the space station to the base on the moon itself, they're going to use 37 tons of water to generate the energy, and that sort of amount isn't feasible to transport to the moon. So it's sort of obvious that we're going to have to get it from the moon. But yeah, this is, they've got plans for what rockets they're going to use and this sort of thing. So it seems quite promising, really.
That's awesome. That's cool.
It's still sort of early stages, and I don't have sort of many more details than that. But that's the sort of plan, I think.
Oh, that's awesome. So one of the things that I've got now, we're recording midweek. I know episodes come out on Friday, but the reason why I'm saying this is because there's a few Nobel Prizes being announced this week. But the one I'm going to talk about right now, just quick, for some cool news this week, is the one with Sir Roger Penrose. He got awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics this year. And for anybody listening, if you don't know why, effectively it was for demonstrating the black holes were an inevitable consequence of Einstein's general theory of relativity. And I don't know if anybody has heard this, but it's quite cool. I was watching the interview with him about it, and it was quite cute. He said that he had to get out the shower to answer the phone for it. That he thought he was of the right age to be given one at 89. So fair play.
Yeah. So Roger Penrose he's probably a physicist that gets overlooked, but he's probably arguably as important as like a Stephen Hawking sort of thing.
Yeah.
You have the greats from back in the day of like Einstein and Planck and these sorts of characters, but in terms of like modern physics, Penrose is definitely up there. And I saw a thing on Twitter earlier about someone Googled him, and there's just lists of like stuff that his name is associated to. So I definitely recommend that someone to sort of everyone sort of just have a look into him, and sort of his discovery on this is pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I actually think he went on the Joe Rogan podcast last year as well. And that was really, really cool. I think they spoke for like 2 hours just about the universe, and it was really cool to actually see him have like a conversation with people instead of just like answering questions.
Yeah. He's a really interesting character as well, I think. So. Yeah. The Nobel Prize is something that I actually want to do a podcast about sort of what is its role in modern sort of science and stuff, but we'll save that. So.
Sounds good. Have you got any more news? Because I've got one more.
I've got two more, so I'll do one of mine.
Cool.
Sticking with space is the James Webb Space Telescope. So this is
updates.
So this was from the 6th of October, so yesterday as recording it. It's that the James Webb Space Telescope has passed its sort of pre-flight launch simulation. So basically, they've put the craft itself. I think they did two things. So one was acoustic testing, so just blasting it with sound. I think it was 140 decibels,
Wow.
just to make sure it could sort of withstand the acoustic shock of obviously launch. And then another one was they've put it on a massive sort of like shake table to make sure that it can withstand the vibrational sort of shaking of launch as well. So it's obviously a big step, and is one of the sort of latter parts of the pre-flight checks, I guess. So this is it sort of getting its final, not scientific, they have to sort of make sure the optics are working and stuff like that. But in terms of the actual hardware and the sort of airworthiness of it, I guess this is sort of like one of the final steps of it getting approved for and ready for launch.
That's awesome. The photos that's going to take is just going to be insane.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The reason why it's such a massive deal is that James Webb Space Telescope has been around for like over a decade now.
Yeah.
So I think it was basically funded. I think it was maybe even the late 90s. It sort of like got approval and was like funded fully in the like early noughties. And it was originally like scheduled to launch in like 2010, I think, and it's been pushed back 4 or 5 times now, and so now it's sort of doing these final checks for launch. The scheduled liftoff is October 31st, 2021, so just over a year away. So,
woohoo! On Halloween as well.
Yeah, that will be a really massive occasion because it will probably be the biggest. Up there with International Space Station and Hubble as sort of things we put in space for.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
for sure. Talking about launches just quick, we've got a launch Crew 1 on Halloween as well this year, 31st of August, which will be cool. I haven't actually looked who the astronauts are yet, so I'm sorry if that's upset anyone. I know Tim Peake's going, isn't he?
I don't know. I've not seen the astronauts list. I just know it's happening on that day. So.
I think Tim Peake's going because he's been tweeting about it quite a lot. But no, that's going to be awesome. I'm excited for that. A space launch on Halloween. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not too late. I don't actually know what time it's going to be, but I can imagine it'll be all right.
Yeah.
But so my last little piece of news, it's not really like news, but this came out yesterday on The Guardian, and I thought it was quite a interesting read. So effectively, for anybody that doesn't know about this, there's like this, is it certain now, or is it still a theory, the whole idea of this other planet orbiting the sun that the Earth crashed into, or is it pretty solid now?
I don't think it's been observed or anything, but I think they had strong theoretical evidence for all this. So.
Cool. So anybody that doesn't know what we're talking about, basically it's the idea that there was another planet called Theia that collided with Earth 4.5 billion years ago, and that's what kind of resulted in the moon on Earth. But basically what The Guardian saying this time is there is a student over at... No, not a student, sorry, a professor over at Durham University who's been simulating this, and he simulated it 300 different times, exploring like different impacts, different outcomes, and how the two would like bash into each other. And there's actually a really cool animation, which we will put up on the Twitter, and it looks really cool. When you're kind of watching it in like animation form and it's all pixels with these two bodies just hitting each other and it all getting launched up into the air, it's very like pretty, but then you kind of think like, oh my god, that's like a planet, and it's like whiplashing the other planet like around it. It's insane.
Wow. I don't think we can even imagine like what it would be like for an entire planet to crash into Earth. Like, the devastation would just be unimaginable.
Yeah. But yeah, so I thought that was cool. Nice little bit of history on the solar system.
Yeah. So yeah, that brings me to my final thing, which is tech related, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go off on one here because I've been thinking about this all week, and it drives me mad. And it's about e-scooters. So have you ever used an e-scooter?
I haven't used an e-scooter.
Okay, so I'll say I've used them in Sweden, in Stockholm. You know, you can. It was a company called Line. They're just on the street. You go tap
Yeah.
your phone on it, you rent them, sort of thing. And I absolutely love them. They are like fantastic. They are so good, and I'm sure you've seen they've started to be like trialed over here in the
Yeah.
UK. So a few cities are sort of trying them as like rental programs, and the sort of things that are coming out of these trials is that they're going to put some really massive limitations on them. So the first one is a speed limit. So in Sweden, I think it's pretty common everywhere, and it's what is being used at the moment in trials, is these things are limited to 15.5 miles an hour.
Okay.
And this sort of lobby group that is trying to get these things basically banned is suggesting a 6 mile an hour limit. That's the first thing.
Okay.
Second thing is that they want to ban them from being used on pavements.
Okay.
Now, just from my experience, the best thing about using them in Sweden is that you can go use them through parks. You know, me and my girlfriend went to this park, and we sort of just rode out for like half an hour on these things. And yeah, we covered a few miles because obviously they do a pretty decent speed.
Yeah.
And you know, we got to like see a place that we just wouldn't have gone to otherwise. So
Yeah.
you know, I've got like personal opinions on this. But firstly, these two things are just completely incompatible with each other. If you're saying that they are being limited to 6 miles an hour, then surely they're the same sort of technology sort of scope of things as like mobility scooters.
Yeah.
So why can't they be used on the pavement?
Yeah.
And if you're saying that they can't be used on the pavement, then surely they're the same as like a bike. So why are they being limited to 6 miles an hour? Like...
Yeah. No, you're totally right. To be fair, I was just about to say, like, it makes sense, like either or, like either, like if they're really gonna like lobby for it, then maybe you limit them, but they're allowed on the pavement, or you don't limit them and they're not allowed on the pavement. But yeah, it doesn't seem.
Well, it just sort of it completely ruins like what they're for. So I'll just like quickly explain like two like case scenarios for this. So the first one for me personally is that I live about 3.5 miles out from the city centre in a sort of village out from the city. So for me, you know, with the hypothetical like Sweden style scooter, that would be absolutely perfect because I could scoot into the city in about 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. And that is a viable alternative to driving. Like where I live, there's a bus every 2 hours. It doesn't run on Sundays. So like public transport just is a no-no.
Yeah.
You know, my options are at the moment, I could walk, I guess. It would take about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Or I drive and it's like a 5-minute drive and I have to park and like walk the last like little bit into town. So like a 15, 20-minute scooter drive into town would just be perfect. Like that would just be ideal.
Yep.
That becomes completely unfeasible. If it's speed limited, that becomes a then like 40-minute scooter drive.
You could get there quicker by jogging.
Exactly. That's like not going to happen.
Yeah.
And there is absolutely no chance I am riding that scooter on the 60-mile-an-hour main road that links my like village to the city. Like it's just not going to happen.
No.
And like on the less personal note, so I studied a little bit about like civil engineering and like infrastructure. Like, I have a bit of an interest in that.
Cool.
There's this sort of thing called the last mile problem, which is like in public transport systems, you know, you can link up like two cities really well, but the reality is that, like, say with a train, most people don't live very close to a train station.
Yeah.
So like the actual train link itself can be super fast and like run all the time, maybe like really good. But unless you have something that means that someone can get from their house to the train station and then on the other end from the train station to, you know, their office, say.
Yeah.
Let's say, you know, it's a 20-minute sort of train journey. Okay. But if you live a mile away and work a mile away from the train station, that's another 20 minutes on either end, which means that your journey, which you could maybe do in 30-minute driving, becomes then a 60-minute journey.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what these scooters are for, because a 1 mile journey just becomes like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So you don't even think about it. You just like scoot to the train station in 2 minutes, and then your journey is just the train.
Yeah.
And it just sort of annoys me that these things, it's an electric vehicle that is like ideal for cities and these sort of short journeys and for combination with public transport. And this is the sort of thing that we surely have to be considering
Yeah.
as a viable, not even viable, a necessary part of like our infrastructure. And people just seem to like want to curtail it at every single like opportunity.
No, yeah, I agree with you. I totally agree with you, because I've seen them when like I've gone places and stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you. I think they're a great idea, and anything that, as you were saying, like helps with getting people out of cars and stuff if they don't need to be using them, or having other options. Because a lot of people as well, they might not take that job, or
Mm-hmm.
they might not do something if the travel is a nuisance. Because I remember, like, even for me when I was going to college, I lived 4 miles away from the train station, and I used to have to like get up so incredibly early and get like the 5 a.m. bus to like this town, and then I'd have to sit at a train station for 2 hours and then get the 7 a.m. train to college, and I'd get to college at like 8 a.m. and I'd be waiting around for an hour. And like you're saying, like with that scooter, I could literally have just chilled at home.
A 4 mile journey becomes a 20-minute.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not the best, but that is
possible.
Is probably in the realms of doable for most people, I think.
Totally.
And especially when you factor in things like the cost of parking a car if you're going to drive to the train station, or the cost of taking a bus. It's just, to me, it just seems such common sense that like we would use these sorts of things. That you go online and you go on like the dreaded BBC News comment section, and it's just people slating it and like.
Yeah.
I
can imagine it'd be quite good for students as well, because I had a lot of friends at uni that didn't want to work like night shifts and stuff at like bars and stuff because they didn't want to walk home in that environment. And like I can imagine if they had an electric scooter, go like 15 miles an hour, you'd be more inclined to do it because you don't have that fear so much.
Yeah, but interestingly, the wet place where I live now, like I don't think I've seen anyone on electric. I saw one person like just sort of go around their garden with this sort of thing. But interestingly, when I was at uni last year, I saw. So in my first year, so 4 years ago, I don't think I ever saw any of these. But like by my fourth year, like there was quite a few people using them because it's just ideal. Because the university I was at, depending where you live, it could easily be like a half-hour walk to uni.
Yeah.
And like even if you take the bus, the bus network. This was at Nottingham. Like the bus network was fantastic, but even so, you have to walk to the bus station, get the bus, and then it drops you sort of in the middle of campus. So like, if you wanted to go to the physics department, that's still like a 5-10 minute walk.
Yeah.
Whereas that sort of whole journey you could do in like 5 or 10 minutes with like an electric scooter. And I did see like a couple of people start to use them.
Yeah.
But it's this, and in particular, it's becoming obvious like more people are moving to cities where you won't have a car and where public infrastructure is going to become more difficult. Like somewhere like London, you can't keep building tube lines like this and like putting more tube trains on. Like there's only like a certain limit, and surely I think most people, if the choice was, I need to do like 3 or 4 stops on the tube, something like an electric scooter is just a better option. And it's just, I just think it's frustrating that they keep trying to like curtail these things.
No, totally. I agree with you. And even as well, like with COVID and stuff, it kind of like separates people up as well. You don't have people like in confined spaces together traveling if everybody's on like scooters.
And I just think it's sort of like a bit short-sighted that, okay, I agree that there is a problem of potentially these things, people whizzing along really fast on pavements. Like, I get that. But surely then the option is to say, okay, people want to use these things. They have really good benefits and they are probably going to become more important, more useful, why not then build more cycle lanes to accommodate them? Like,
Yeah.
rather than just saying, oh, we're just going to ban them. And then when we sort of do need them in 10 years' time, they're sort of like a weird technology that people don't want to use because they're not used to them.
Yeah.
Like, surely the ideal thing is to sort of like jump on it and like sort of just phase them in rather than having this sort of like repression that we seem to be using at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. Because like even in like Amsterdam, they have all those cycle lanes, and everybody's on a bike. Do you know what I mean? They've even got like bicycle traffic lights and stuff.
Yeah.
And like if you just swapped all those bikes out with electric scooters, I think it would run fine. So I don't understand why that couldn't work.
Yeah.
Like somewhere in the UK.
You know, an electric scooter or like an electric bike is sort of, you know, obviously cycling is good and it's probably maybe even better than electric scooter, but the reality is that no one wants to cycle for 20 minutes to go to like a work meeting or go to a date or something, you know. But I think probably most people would be quite happy, you know, using electric scooter and like turning up at a bar or something. There's no like issue with that. So yeah, I think that's my rant over.
That's a good little rant. Companies be aware, or not companies, sorry, people making these, lobbying these ideas. Matty's coming for you.
And if anyone wants to, any scooter manufacturer wants to sponsor the podcast, you can.
Yeah, totally. We'll promote your scooters.
Yeah, I'll rant about this every single week if you get me one of those.
Yeah. We might even do a live episode, but we'll be on scooters.
Yeah.
Talking about them. But no, I think that pretty much wraps up this week's episode. It's, I think, is it World Space Week or is it National Space Week? I think it's World Space Week.
I think it's World Space Week. That's what I've seen on Twitter.
So, yeah, have a good World Space Week, everybody, and a good weekend or whatever you're doing this week. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If you want to drop us a message or suggest a topic to us in the future, you can hit us up on social media at The Infinite Void, and that's on Instagram and Twitter. The Infinite Void Pod, sorry. And then the email address is theinfinitevoidpodcast@gmail.com if you want to hit us up with something a little bit more meatier. I don't know. There's not that many characters on social media, so it depends what you want to say. But that's pretty much it. And if you want to drop me a message, I'm at Jacob E. Carson on Twitter. And Matty, you are?
I am the Matty JMP on Twitter.
And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.